everyone, and welcome back to the channel. I'm so glad you're here today. Today I have the pleasure of talking with Beth Blaufuss, who is incredibly depth and experienced in Catholic education. She's worked as a consultant in dioceses across the country, New York, Mississippi, Ohio, and also right here in Washington, D.C. And she's also served as principal at Archbishop Carroll. I'm only covering a little teensy bit of what she does, so I'm going to ask her that. But real quickly, we're going to dive into what makes Catholic schools unique, the common challenges they face, and some practical tips and insights for school leaders. I know this conversation will be helpful for anyone who cares about the future of Catholic education. And so with that, I think the first question I have for you, Beth, first, thank you so much for coming. And I'm very excited about this. And two, tell us a little bit about your experience because it is so big and vast. And I wanted to make sure it was completely accurate.
I appreciate that, Melissa. And it's always fun to talk to you. And it's fun to join any conversation about the future of Catholic education. So currently I serve as the Vice President of Strategic Initiatives for Partnership Schools, which is a new way of thinking about running Catholic schools. It is a school management organization, which is a structure that's more commonly found in the charter world, where we come in and run existing Catholic schools in a new way. And we can talk more about that eventually. You were so kind in your introduction. I will say I have worked in education in a number of different states. You mentioned Mississippi. I was fortunate enough to work on a project called the Global Teaching Project in Mississippi, to do a little bit of consulting work for that really cool project, which is about increasing the number of Mississippi students who are getting AP science credits, but that was not a Catholic education project. So,
yeah, thank you so much for clarifying. I really appreciate it.
No worries.
Honestly, and I want to tell everybody a little bit of our experience. So I got to meet Beth many years ago at a Latino student fun event. And from then we became quite quick in our friendship because it was just so exciting. We had so many common things. And for me, it was very exciting because I got to learn so much from you. So shortly thereafter, you helped me a lot when I had just started the school. And I am so forever grateful. And I always think about the impression that you had and a lot of your insights. So I really appreciate that. So I just wanted to say that out, for the audience of just how grateful I am for you. And I know that everyone is going to learn a lot, and I will learn a lot from this conversation too. So what first drew you to this kind of work with Catholic schools, and what's keeping you excited for all of these years?
What a fun question. Before I dive into it, I should
Yeah.
add, in true Montessori fashion, Melissa, I don't know how much you learned from me and how much I held a mirror up so that you could learn from yourself. So the feeling is mutual. I feel like I learned a lot from our conversations. So I really appreciate it. What first interested me in Catholic education was having a job. So I had taught in a Title I public high school in Nashville, where I'm from. In some ways, as a cradle Catholic who aspires to find the Holy Spirit in social justice work. When I left college, I felt like working in public school was little C Catholic in a way that, frankly, big C Catholic schools aren't, or aren't often. And so I went to work in public education, very much driven by my faith. For a couple different reasons, I was moving to the Washington, D.C. area, and a Catholic high school was the first one to offer me a job before I moved. So I thought, well, I'll do this for a year, and then I'll move on with the rest of my life. And the school that I went to work for is a hidden gem of Catholic education in the DC area, Bishop McNamara High School in Prince George's County, Maryland. And I was hired by a guy named Marco Clark at a time of real transition for the high school. The school had sort of been recovering from a tenuous period in its history. It is now flourishing, and Marco Clark is now the head of uh, uh, Holy Cross College in South Bend, Indiana. So my 1 year commitment to Bishop McNamara became an 8 year odyssey with the school and the first of 27 years in Catholic education. What keeps me in it now is the same thing that riveted me during that first year at Bishop McNamara, which is I felt like as an educator before I went to work in Catholic schools, if you've ever watched them film a musical scene from a movie, you'll see that they don't really play the music while they're filming the scene. The music gets laid in later. I felt like I was doing the dance steps, but it was choreography. When I became a teacher in a Catholic school, it became dance. It became a way in which my interior journey as a person of faith and as a professional, and the journey I was hoping my students could go on, became the same journey, if that makes any sense.
It makes a lot of sense actually to me. I think that for me, I had a similar experience. Um, when I was a young mom, right, and I just had the one child and I was pregnant with the second, and I'm watching the elder of the two um, starting to go into the public school system, and I guess in my head, I felt like I was the first teacher, so of course I'm going to make sure that my child is going to get a Catholic education. That is my responsibility. But when that piece of it um, is not in the education, there is a huge void, right? And it's going to get filled, right? And we don't necessarily get to fill that. And so, and I saw that in real time. So then when I was starting the school, my spiritual guide, who was a priest that was really helping me, a diocesan priest actually, who was really helping me. He was like, "Why are you not starting a Catholic school?" And I just felt I wasn't allowed to. I felt because I was part of the laity, I wasn't allowed to. And so he squashed that for me real quickly. And so I was very excited that I could do this. And the difference between is so real because you can't live life without religion, right? Like you really can't separate the two. It, in fact, I would say you can't even live life without religion, period. Like, so that needs to be there, that faith needs to be there. And so when you have it kind of come together, it's like, then you see the garden bloom, right? And before that, it's not there. So I feel the same way. I think that's a beautiful way. I think your way of like the dance, I I think that's a beautiful way of putting it because it's so true. Because you can't have it, and with that void, something else goes there, and that's the scary part, right?
And I'll add that it's often hard to put your finger on the difference because people are still annoying in Catholic schools, right? It's not like all of a sudden everybody's like walking down the hallway levitating and virtue thrives in every corner of the place. There are still actual human beings, far from saints, in the hallways of Catholic schools. I think the novelist Anne Beattie describes Catholicism as a language for longing.
Aw.
Language for longing. And I think that in Catholic schools, one incredibly precious tool we have is a language for our deepest aspirations as individuals and as a community. We have a sense of the journey we hope we're on. And when we are annoying to each other and when we have challenges, that shared language and that shared set of aspirations help us navigate those moments. They also animate our work with a set of aspirations that, it's interesting that the Catholic Church talks about the idea of the human person fully alive. And if you look at the Harvard Human Flourishing Program's sort of research-backed definition of flourishing, it aligns remarkably well with this centuries-old tradition of being fully alive. And so I think what we're aiming for in Catholic schools is to have our kids do more than produce good test scores.
Yeah. To be the whole human. Yeah. The whole thing. Yeah. Actually, I love that you're talking about the people that annoy you, right? Like I love that. And let me say this, because I think that when you said that, it like a flash memory came to me that recently, like last night, I'm scrolling on Facebook, and one of my Facebook groups is, these I have a couple of Catholic Facebook groups that I'm a member of, and one of them, and I can't remember which one right now. I want to guess, but I'm not going to. But they were talking about grace for other Catholics who aren't necessarily in the same place we're in, and one of the members of the group was really frustrated at another member because she wasn't Catholic enough or whatever. And then the administrator of the group was like, we're all in different journeys, right? And that's the thing, like we have to show grace to others, and we have to realize that we're all in different places in our journey with Jesus. And like that's a big deal, like, and so having that grace and showing people, oh, well, this is what is coming from the Pope, or this is what the Catechism says, or showing them where they can find that information, I think is really important. But I think that like we as Catholics need to remember, as Jesus is our example, that we're not always going to get it right, but when we do, hopefully others can show us with grace where we can find those answers. So, but
amen to that.
I know, but yeah, I think, but as a Catholic, sometimes I do in my head think, well, geez, that's not really the way we believe. And I have to remind people that, like, I hear you and I understand where that's coming from. It's just, that's not us. And this is why.
Yeah, I think we need to have confidence that God's going to handle the judgment part. Like, if anybody needs to be judged, I feel pretty confident that God's got that covered. So that frees the rest of us up from
to be here on the same plane, and be here for each other. This is something that I would love to hear, because I have noticed this before in my Montessori circles. In my Montessori circles, when I talk to people in the same country, in the same, like, in the world, right? Like when I talk to my Montessori folks, excuse me, they are, our experiences, we have a lot in common, but also our experiences are very different because the demographics are very different, or the community is very different. And here you're traveling all across the United States and you're seeing all of these different schools. And I was wondering, are you seeing some differences based on the demographics, but we're all Catholic. So are there differences in the demographics because we have that unity of faith? I would love to see what your experience. Are there challenges that are just unique, or are they similar?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. I think what unites every Catholic school, I hope, is a belief that the students we serve and the people we serve them with are made in the image and likeness of God and therefore made for greatness. I think the similarities stop there. Um, you go to any Catholic school and they will describe both their special qualities and their problems as completely unique to them.
Okay.
I will say that most of my career has been spent in schools where there are more people of color than there are European Americans. And I think that's not in some Catholic schools, European Americans are by far the majority. I have also worked in Catholic schools that are growing more typical in that a large number of families and students don't identify themselves as Catholic.
Oh, that's interesting.
But they still seek a Catholic education. So I think, and I should be fact checked on these numbers, but I think in 1970, when the National Catholic Education Association and the bishops first began doing a census of Catholic schools across the country, I think around 6 or 7% of students in Catholic schools were not Catholic. In the last couple of years, that number has been over 20% of students in our schools are not Catholic. So I do think there's a difference, maybe, among, I think one of the biggest differences in across Catholic schools has to do with the percentage of free and reduced lunch students who are present. Because I think when you are serving kids of privilege and families of privilege, and when you're serving low-income families, there are some logistical quirks, some challenges that may be different. Oddly enough, I think the challenges are much more similar than they are different. Families can put their own family agendas ahead of what the school is trying to prioritize, no matter their economic background. Parents are seeking the same thing for their kids, no matter their background. They just want them to have a good life. So that I think is very similar, but the resources that a school has to bring to bear, 3 of the 4 schools I work with right now don't have parishes attached. They're K-8 elementary schools. The parishes have closed, but the schools stayed open. And so it's an incredible opportunity for evangelization and for living the gospel. It's one we get to do without a parish subsidy because there's no parish. So the economics can be a little bit different. I will say as well, circling back to that idea of schools that have an increasing number of non-Catholic students, I think we have an incredible advantage at schools where a large number of students are not Catholic compared to schools where everybody is Catholic. And here's the advantage I think we have. We have to name out loud what it means to be Catholic in our schools because people walk in the door not knowing what that is. Mm-hmm. I think in communities where everyone is Catholic, it can be easy to make the assumption that the Catholicism is going to walk in the front door of the school. Now, I think if you ask any principal at a school where everybody's Catholic, if the same sense of what it means to be Catholic walks in the door with every family, they'll probably tell you no. So I think what you were describing in the Facebook group, the sense of like, just not sure they're Catholic enough. Like you put 5 Catholics in a room and you're probably going to have 5 slightly different definitions of what it means to be Catholic. I would call that the work of the Holy Spirit. I would call that charism, and the fact that one of the gifts of the Holy Spirit to the church is lots of different charisms. But ever since the Dominicans and the Franciscans were battling it out in Italy in the Middle Ages, like we've had this sense of like, my flavor of Catholicism is better than your flavor of Catholicism. So I do think, just to sort of tidy up the answer to your question, I think the similarities of both challenge and opportunity across Catholic schools, whether they be high income or low income schools, many of those challenges are about creating a sense of community when everybody's kind of got their own agenda. I think that in schools without a lot of Catholic students, some people might point to our schools and say, well, that's a disadvantage because how can you call yourselves Catholic? I think there's an incredible discipline that we have to bring and an explicitness to building the faith life of the community that we have in schools where not a lot of kids are Catholic.
I have heard, I haven't seen, I've just heard whispers, and I think that like it's kind of like the smoke, right? Before you see the fire. And so I'm kind of excited to see that there's a lot more young Catholic adults coming into church, right? And I'm starting to see it at my own parish, and they come in veiled, and it's like, what? What? This is wonderful. It's exciting. It's unexpected for me, and so I'm getting kind of excited that there seems to be this shift back into the church with the younger adults, and so I think it's not really a secret. But we do get compared to our school gets compared to some of the other Catholic Montessori schools in the region. None of them in DC, but in the area, Maryland and Virginia. And their schools are like over 90% Catholic. We are not. We're nowhere close to that, actually. There might be some of the families who are like, oh, I went to Catholic school, or my parents are Catholic, right? But they're not practicing Catholics. Whereas some of the other schools that are in Virginia and Maryland that are Catholic Montessori schools, they're a larger percentage of devout Catholic families. And so I guess I've never seen my calling to like preach to the choir. Like that doesn't seem like my calling, right? I think it's wonderful, and I think that that's a wonderful aspiration or mission in your life. So I'm not knocking it, but it's not been mine, right? And so I see that there's these younger families that are going into the Catholic Church, and I'm excited about that. And I can't help but think that like what you're talking about, and we've had a lot of full conversions here at my school, and that's been really exciting to be a part of that. And we have one this year that we're very excited about. And so that's what like you mentioned, the evangelization. I just see it that way personally, that's my mission. I mean, especially since we're so niche anyways, we're Montessori and we're Catholic, and we're also in the Spanish, dual immersion. So we're reaching very niche groups of people. So the people that are attracted aren't necessarily attracted because we're Catholic. Maybe they are because they know that we're not going to be way the other way. Right? Yeah. And they're like, okay, so there's going to be some like family values that are here at the school. But they were also really attracted to the Spanish piece or the Montessori piece. And so that's why they come here. And it's kind of like fishing, right? Fishing to bring people back to church, back to God. And and back to the faith. So I think that, yeah, I think that's, you're spot on that, like, sometimes, and again, it's not to knock what other people are doing, because I think that that's very important as well. But I think we could do it together, right? And, we have to bring, because there's a lot of Catholics that were falling away from the church, right? And so they were only coming to the Catholic school because it was familiar, or because it was the best school in town, or who knows, any number of reasons. But, like, you're talking, and I didn't realize that this was happening, that they were staying at the Catholic school, but the Catholic Church had closed. Like, that's oh my goodness. Like,
It's
ah,
amazing.
like that, you said that, and that, it's scary. It's
It is. It is. And we'd need a whole nother podcast to talk about sort of the
more people
forces.
to, like, all kind of come together to problem solve this one.
And also, that phenomenon tends to be true in communities that were redlined by
Oh, yes, yes, yes,
American,
yes, yes.
government policy. And so those tended to be full of Catholics, Jews, and people of color. And I think there's an amazing book called Parish Boundaries, who is I'm blanking, John McGreevy, who's the provost of Notre Dame, wrote a book called Parish Boundaries that talks about this history of middle class flight, including Catholic flight to the suburbs. And if Catholics had not equated social mobility with geographic mobility, how would the entire core of a lot of American cities be different now?
Interesting.
Which is a really interesting question. I think that one of the biggest challenges facing Catholics today is nostalgia. I think that the Holy Spirit calls us to build, and that we have a tremendous past that we can be proud of and mine. Like, Catholic tradition is deeply, deeply soothing. I walk into a church and I smell a few hundred years of incense, or a 100 years of
Right.
incense soaked into wood along with lemon polish. And I feel like, like, that smell is like the smell of my soul waking up. And it is
Yes.
deeply soothing in a way that nothing else in the world is.
And it's the beauty, the smells. So it's completely sensorial. So yes, the nostalgia, because it's tipping into, like, all those parts of the brain. Yes.
Right. At the same time, I feel like the Holy Spirit is on the move. The Pope Francis talked about a church that's a field hospital, that goes out. I think we have to have enough faith in God and in the Holy Spirit to recognize that we have an opportunity to build a day for Catholic education and for spiritual life in the United States that is grounded in the past and not a reproduction of the past. You talked about the young people who are coming back to the church, and they are finding in some of those traditions a deep source of peace that nothing else in our culture is giving them right now. There are lots of people who look at that and think, that's not me, and they head right back out the door. But we don't see them. They are invisible to us, except in the Pew Research Center statistics on the nuns, on NONES, on people who have left the church, who don't profess any religion. And so I am intrigued by this question, which is, what can Catholic education be in the future that it has never been before?
Yeah.
You know, when we look at the people who built those parishes and schools, they were building something that never existed before.
Right.
And ironically, if we get hung up on just inhabiting what they built, we might inhabit their buildings, but we don't inhabit their spirit, which is let's plant faith here. You know, in this rowdy, you know, Irish neighborhood in, you know, the southern tip of New
Yeah.
York, um in fields where people are thinking you're crazy to put a church here. This is, you know,
Right.
plowed ground. This isn't a city. And what do you know? The city, you know, grew around it.
Kind of like Saint Cabrini.
Exactly. I think, and one way to to invite all of us, including people who are kind enough to be listening to us, think about this, could be this thought experiment. At their peak in the 1960s, US Catholic schools served about 4.5 million students.
Okay.
Catholic Americans built the single largest non-public school system the world has ever seen. And it served 4.5 million students at its peak. Catholic schools serve about 1.6 million students now.
Okay.
If an angel came to you in the middle of the night and said, go and serve 4.5 million students now, how would we do that? What would that look like? Do we have enough faith in ourselves, in the flexibility of different charisms within the Catholic Church? Do we have enough conviction that children and families desperately need what our schools and our faith have to offer to do that gutsy, innovative work to as you say, like kind of go out, to be present to families who won't walk in the door of a Catholic church, but they might walk in the door of a Catholic school. And whatever reason draws them to come in, we can
Yeah.
take that and be present to them in a way that makes the gospel present. And I'm even more excited by that possibility than I am proud of the past of Catholic education. And I'm pretty proud of the past of Catholic education.
No, I think it's wonderful. I think, yeah, I like where you're going with this, like of that thought experiment. Like what, and I don't know if you saw in Florida, like people are leaving public education in droves. They are doing homeschooling and they're looking at the private schools, the Catholic schools for sure. And so I wonder, and I'm like participating in your thought experiment here. Like I'm wondering maybe the future of Catholic education looks a lot more like homeschool. I wonder. And I don't know. But then like you have, I'm sorry, I'm like now negating my own thought.
Where are
But
you
then I'm
going?
thinking, unfortunately, the economics of today is one where you have two parents working. That is so sad, so sad. And like where a parent couldn't economically stay home. And I don't know the answer to that one. That one, I actually spend a lot of time, probably more than I should, thinking about that.
You know, it's interesting. I think when we think about the richness of the Catholic Church, um, I think high schools are a great illustration of this. You know,
Yeah.
you have like I'll use a city that I love and am proud to work in, Cleveland, Ohio. There is, you know, there's a Benedictine high school. There's a Holy Cross high school. There are two Holy Cross high schools. There's a Jesuit high school. There are diocesan schools. The flavor of each one of them is different. Um, you know, the Catholic Church figured out algorithms before there was algorithms. Um, And I think shame on us as American Catholics if we don't recognize that the Holy Spirit speaks differently to different people.
Yeah.
Um, and I think we give each other grief. But I think if we think about worship music, you know, I have family members who are like, oh, there's no clapping in church. Don't clap in church. You know, give me a good gospel mass and I'm great. I used to go to the Novus Ordo Latin Mass at St. Matthew's all the time. Um, whether your soul tunes to Gregorian chant or gospel music or the music I was raised on, Jesuit top 40 guitar songs, Christ's love is for all. Like if it takes these different charisms, these different forms of school, Catholic homeschooling, micro schooling,
Yeah.
turning around existing parish schools, if it takes Montessori and Catholic classical, that's a feature, not a bug. When we think about what exactly it is that Catholic schools have to offer the world in this moment and children and teens in this moment, I do think there are a couple different things that we can lean into that are the same across those different flavors of
Yeah.
Catholicism. And I think you point to one of them. There is tradition, and that that tradition is one that all of us should feel equal access to. You know, what your skin color looks like shouldn't determine whether you like gospel music or Gregorian chant.
Oh, yeah.
And I know
Yeah.
you know that. I do think kids are craving, and I'd love to hear if this resonates with what you see at
Yeah.
school as well. Um, Kids are craving a deep sense of peace. Um, Particularly kids in I think at one point I would have said that this belongs a little bit more to kids in cities, but I actually think
There's
our
actually really good,
devices have
yeah.
made everybody's head really noisy.
There's actually really good research on this that I saw, and the the person who I heard it from, not the research. I'll have to get all of this together, but the person I heard it from, he equated it to, at SeaWorld, the killer whale that's in the pool, right? And he's like, you took the killer whale out of its element and you put it in a pool. That animal was never meant to be in a pool ever, like at all. So like the fin goes, the dorsal fin goes like this, and then it dies in 5 years instead of having a life that's like, I don't know, however long the killer whale goes for. Let's say it's 25 years. I don't know, but like you did that. Like when you put the whale in the pool, that's what happened. Well, the same thing happens with humans. We're not supposed to be on our screens. We're not supposed to be indoors. We're not supposed to be in, we're not even supposed to be in communities over 100, 200 people. We're now living in these big cities where, there's no way our brain can take in all of that information. And so his thought was, we need to be back in nature. We need to be, and I think that like as Catholics, like, and I know this, not a lot of people know this, and I feel like I'm right now one of those people, those vegans that, I have to tell everyone I'm a vegan.
Tell me about your veganism, Melissa.
Yeah. But I think that that's a really big part of it for me, is that like we're not meant to, like, as humans, be consuming this amount of like processed foods. Like we were never meant to be that. And so, I think honoring the person, the humans that God made, and part of honoring that temple is by nourishing it the way it was intended, right? And so we were intended to be in community for sure, but that community isn't on screens. That community is like face to face and touching and hugging and, embracing, handshaking, high fiving. I don't know, like, like it's supposed to
Yeah.
be that way. And it's supposed to be, you know, and worship is supposed to happen. Like that's always supposed to be there. So we should be worshiping. And so, which goes back to the schools that take all of that worship out, like something's going to replace it, because as humans, we need it and we crave it. And so if that's taken out, it's gonna happen. It's just, what is it going to be, right? So maybe it's going to be worshiping the screen, right? Oh gosh. Like, or some other, you know, false deity, you know. And I mean, we see that in the Bible, we see that everywhere, right? It's talked about. And so so I think that, like, going for me, like, it was a health thing. I saw my health was in decline, and so I switched to a plant-based diet. And so, but since doing that, I realized, like, this is the way that I honor the temple that God gave me, right? This is how I honor that. And in addition to all the other stuff that I consume, right? And be part of. And I think that, like, we need to remember that. And so you mentioned the micro schools or the homeschooling. And I think that that's part of going back to, we were never as humans intended to live the way that we currently are. So if the expectation is that, like, living the way that we currently are is going to come to a point where to have those outcomes that we expect, I don't think that that's a reasonable expectation if we're not originally going back to what we were intended to be, right? And so I think if we're honoring what God created, we need to, like, then I think in that way, that's how we're going to hit those outcomes that we want. Sorry, I don't know if that made a lot of sense, because I was thinking.
It does. Melissa, I think one of the things that I think you've pointed to, which is an incredible luxury that Catholic schools have across different sectors of education, an obligation we have and a pain point that we have, is this. In Catholic schools, we can align our daily practices with our deepest, most cherished beliefs about God, the world, and each other, and ourselves. That is such an incredible invitation. There are lots of practical realities that get in the way of that. But I think that the past of Catholic education, that spike to 4.5 million students in Catholic schools, happened in part because that's just what Catholics did, right? If you were Catholic, you went to Catholic school. We can't go back to that. And that's actually a great thing, because I think the future of Catholic education will be in part informed by what you just described about your veganism, which is intentionally bringing integrity to our schools, in that our deepest beliefs and the day-to-day workings of our schools align. In keeping with that idea of different charisms, you know, I think the beliefs that are universal across the church resonate in different ways in different contexts. You know, as you talk about the smallness of human community, I also have the song City of God going off in my head, you know, like, so I think that what we're called to in Catholic education is to be intentional about how the faith shows up, and never satisfied with how the faith shows up in our work. You know, do our admissions policies reflect the gospel? Like, that's, I think, one of the biggest challenges Catholic schools face. Like, Christ had a preferential option for the poor. Catholic schools that exercise a preferential option for the poor cease to become Catholic schools because they go bankrupt. So, you know, particularly without school choice funding. So, so there's always this heartbreaking tension between pursuing our deepest beliefs and
Yes.
doing so in a fallen, flawed world.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I struggle with that one too. Like there's a part of me that it's like, I look at all it's admissions, absolutely, but it's like from top to bottom, like where can we improve? Where can we get better? Where's the and? I'm always looking at ands, right? So that's my big thought game is like, okay, and right, like, and we can do this, and we can do this, right? And I understand that. That's that's a good thing and a bad thing. but I love like conversations with you, but I do want to kind of wrap this up. And so I wanted to really quickly ask you one final question and then we'll close this out. So if you had a magic wand, okay, and can fix one systematic challenge facing Catholic schools nationwide, what would it be?
Well, that is a particularly fun question. What I would fix is in some ways what we've already talked about, which is I would fix our nostalgia. I would make us as excited about the future as we are proud of the past. As a part of that, I would, my magic wand would make risk taking in pursuit of that future easier. What do I mean by that?
Yeah.
When you talk about Catholic micro schools, when you talk about, Montessori schools, startup schools like you're doing, I think Catholic education needs an infusion of venture philanthropy. We need funding. The school choice funding is doing can do amazing work. It has not caused Catholic enrollment to explode across the country.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And I think part of that is because in order to really tap into that potential, we're going to need to try some new things, whether it's turning around schools in a new way, which is what my organization does, whether it is starting new schools as you've done. School choice funding is insufficient to provide the startup capital for some of this risk taking. I think we also need to do the spiritual work of making it okay for some of these experiments to cease. Like if you start a Catholic micro school and it doesn't end up working out, there's a way in which others can learn from that experience, but it's just, the time wasn't ripe for that experiment in that place. I don't think Catholics particularly, and I think institution building is hard. So I think one of the challenges is figuring out how both financially and socially to make innovating and risk taking within Catholic education spaces safer to do.
I love that. I love that. With that, Beth, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and perspective. Wisdom is yours, for sure.
We need to hang out more, Melissa. Might reassess that.
It's clear how deeply you care about supporting Catholic schools and the communities they serve. If someone were to like to reach out to you, how would be the best way to get in touch with you?
Email, and I can share my email. We could maybe put it in the comments.
Yeah.
And then LinkedIn, message me on LinkedIn.
LinkedIn. Oh, that's good. I like that. And to everyone watching, I hope you found this conversation as inspiring and useful as I did. If you enjoyed it, please be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might find it beneficial. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Bye.